All right, welcome everyone to the July 2020 meeting of the Mississippi PowerShell User Group. Tonight we have Stephen Judd with us, and he'll be presenting Evolution of PowerShell, from console to script to function. Take it away, Stephen.
Thank you. The idea of this talk came from just my experience over the years of working with PowerShell and how I tend to I go through these iterations of I have an idea, I do some work, and then that idea gets some more legs, or if it's not a good idea, cast it to the side, and then you put a little bit more work into it, you put a little bit more work into it, and the script just kind of evolves. And it's actually kind of fun to go back and look at some of your old scripts. And I keep some of my original scripts back from 2010 when I finally committed to, okay, this PowerShell thing is important, I gotta learn this, I gotta get used to it, because before that I was a VBS scripter. And I didn't have much experience with objects, so I had to go through all that pain of learning it. And so what I thought I'd do is I'd kind of walk through an example here of a idea or a problem that came up, and I started poking around on it, and I took it from a console app to a script, and then onto a function. So let's roll forward here. Give you just a really brief run on who I am. I'm Stephen Judd, as eloquently introduced just a minute ago. I'm a multi-year, multi-discipline IT pro. I've done a lot of different roles in IT. I am definitely a PowerShell enthusiast. I have seen some of the things it can do. Some of the things I've seen are done by people a lot more skilled in different areas than me, but for myself, I've done a lot with it, and it has been very effective in me getting things done and being effective about how I get things done and consistent about how I get things done. So that's what I'm really excited about, is about what PowerShell can do for solutions and how it makes them better. I'm also a dad joke enthusiast. I did promise someone that I was going to take it easy on the dad jokes this time, but I do have a YouTube presentation on April Fools of this year that I did for the Research Triangle PowerShell User Group. So if you want to see that, go take a look at that. And I'll warn you now, there are some dad jokes, for sure. I'm not really a fashion icon, I just thought this was funny. So, okay, moving on. Talk about the outline of what we're going to be talking about today. And the first is, what is the problem? Then after we talk about the problem, then we're going to get to the console-based solution, which is usually where I wind up starting. And then we're going to have the script that arose from the one-liner. Because after I've done the one-liner, I know it works, especially if I'm ever going to run this thing again. I'm going to want to make a script. And then the fancification, it's not a word, but if you put it in quotes, it becomes a word, right? But it's the fancification of the script. I pressed and it didn't, there we go. And from the fancification of the script, it moves into the function. And the function is the way I view it, the function is different. I view functions differently than I view consoles and scripts, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is and why I view them differently. And then there's not just the function, but there's the advanced function, and that gets us to the final product. We're going to get to all of these today, or tonight, or this evening, whichever it is for you. So let's talk about the problem. An organization, a theoretical organization as far as anyone is concerned, is using Proofpoint to protect email from malware and phishing attacks. This may be somewhat relevant to our pre-talk discussion where we were talking about email and the fun of email. In this case, we got Proofpoint to protect the email. When Proofpoint protects the email, it rewrites those URLs that it receives in the email so that if those URLs are deemed to be malicious by Proofpoint's analytics or by admins interacting with those and saying, yeah, this actually is bad and it needs to be blocked, they can be blocked before the PC or the user browses to that malicious site. So even when it comes in, if no one's clicked on it and then Proofpoint says, oh, that's bad, it can be marked as bad, and that URL, because it's rewritten, it's going to save the user from going to a phishing or a malware site. Proofpoint is not unique. You may have a tool at your organization that does this as well. In fact, Outlook.com online rewrites the links via safe links. And so if you're looking in Outlook.com and you're viewing them through the web interface, you'll see that those links are rewritten. So here's the problem. It is hard to read and work with the modified URLs if you want to review or verify or share the original URL. So if you do a copy and you paste that URL into your preferred communication program, instant messaging, or your documentation, whatever, you get this really long cryptic URL. And people find that to be off-putting. So that's our problem. Here is an example of an email. And so the email is GitHub Awesomeness. It was sent to myself by myself. You know, nobody's ever used email to move files around, have they? But you know, I needed this for an example. And so I have the URL here that says, check out my GitHub repo for truly exceptional content. And by the way, that is the GitHub repo for the code that we're going to be going over in this talk. Okay, that is our URL. And if you just hover over that URL, you will see this rewritten URL. And as you can see, it starts with urldefense.com. And then it has some more stuff, and then it gets to characters that no one can memorize for obvious reasons. In the middle of this rewritten URL, you can see that there's the original URL. And on both sides of that URL are these double underscores. So we now know how we can get to the original URL from the rewritten URL. Okay. So we have our problem defined. You've seen it. Let's talk about how we would do this through the user interface. Well, you're going to alternate click the link in your mail client. You're going to select copy link address. And of course, this I'm assuming that you're using the Outlook web interface, but lots of other tools have that different words. Then you're going to open Notepad. I picked Notepad because it's fast and ubiquitous, but you can use whatever you're going to paste into. And so you then paste your URL. And then you select the URL carefully, select it, that is, inside the rewritten URL. And then you copy that selection, and you're hoping that what you pasted into didn't also become a hyperlink, because then it's hard to click it. And if you need to click just the few parts, and that becomes fun. And by fun, I mean not fun. And then you paste your URL in whatever your final destination is. And then you get another email and another email and another email. And then you eventually go see a doctor for repetitive stress injuries. Because who wants to do all that clicking and clicking and clicking? Okay. So level 1, we have the PowerShell command. So let's get that URL using PowerShell. All right, let me see if I got this set up here. 1 second. Okay, get the URL using PowerShell. Yes, of course, there are other ways to get the code, but we're intelligent and very clever people, and we do things the right way. I realized that I should have highlighted the right way, because we are going to be using PowerShell to the console. Let's see, let me do a quick ls here. Now, before I go any farther, I'm going to tell you that when I am on the console, I shortcut like a maniac. So if you say, well, you should be using the full command, that is correct. You should be using the full command unless you know all the aliases and you're going for speed. So instead of get child item, I enter ls. I do that because it's one less character than dir, and it also is ring finger from one hand to the other. So I'm all about getting this stuff fast. And I am going to do run console command. And so I wrote a little script to run all of the console commands that we're going to look at here in just a second. So here we go. So this is an example of a URL protected by the URL defense. So here's our URL, and we're going to take that URL as a string, and we're going to put it into the $URL. So if I do $URL, there we go. There's our string. All right, so let's continue on, and let's make sure the URL is pulled from the variable. So what I did in this command is I do $URL, and I pipe that into select string. Again, I'm aliasing like a maniac. And then I do a regular expression after select string to go find $_ any characters, not greedy, that's what the question mark means, and then $_. Now, unfortunately, don't have time to explain how regex works, so you'll either have to trust me or you know regex and you know that that's how it works. I do recommend that you learn regex. Super powerful. Great. Okay, so moving on. We're going to check what's contained in that object. So the command was URL, select string, and get member type property. Now, because I'm doing this in one program, my context is weird in that the get member, that's what GM stands for, comes out a little unusual. But if I run it again in the debug, I couldn't figure out how to do this neatly. It comes out like this. And all I wanted to pull back was the property member types. So in here is what we want to get next, is the matches, because we want to get what matched my regex expression. And I realized when I ran this command, I made a mistake, because you can't read matches. You got the curly braces and the 0. I don't know what that is. But if I went back and looked at the properties, I could see that it was an object. Oh, okay, since it's an object contained within a property, then we need to expand that object. And so this is the expansion of the object. So I did select, expand property matches. And so now I can see what's in here. And what I'm actually looking for is the value. So move to the value property, and we say, okay, well, give me just the value. Well, that's great, but it gave me the value plus the value. So it's the name and the result, but that's still not what I'm looking for. I just want the value property. So now I took the same command, I put it inside of the braces. I did a property by dot sourcing it directly. And so now I have my URL. Perfect. That's what I was looking for. So now we remove the $_. So we do a replace command, replace $_, and we put it to null. So they just go away. Ta-da! I now have what's inside. Now, looking at that command, would you really want to type that command every time you want to get the inside URL? No, we don't want to do that. All right, so let's continue on. Also, what if your URL, for some unknown reason, had $_ in it as well? So that would break the URL because only the first and the last set should be removed. So we want to make sure that our command is going to work. So notice this time I did URL2, and I put the same in there, except this time between Stephen and Judd, I just added $_ to see what would happen. All right, so let's run it again. Let's make sure the select string works. And awesome thing about PowerShell 7 is when you do select string, it highlights what it was searching for and what it found. You can already see the problem if we continue on. So if we check the value, we run the same thing with the .value property. Yeah, it cut it off. All right, so there's a problem with the regex. So let's fix the regex. Now, if you're familiar with regex, you know what I did. If you're not, I removed the question mark. So now this does any character, any number of characters with what they call greedy. So it'll go find the last set and the very first set. And so now we've got what I was looking for in the URL. And now for the replace and failure. And why did this fail? Well, it's because replace doesn't know which ones you want to replace. It does all of them. So now I no longer have the underscore in the URL. Okay, so let's fix this. The way I fixed it is I used substring to remove the first two characters and the last two characters. So here's the command. And I say substring 2, so start 2 characters in, or skip the first 2 characters and then start. And then I pass the URL into select string again, and I pull back the length -4. Now, initially I might have thought, well, isn't this length -2? Well, you have to remember that at the beginning are the first 2 underscores and at the end are the last 2. So you need to pull back the length -4. Or you could enter it like this. So I pass my URL into select string, and I pull the matches substring value back. And the difference between this command and the previous command is I've done all .properties and .methods. So see how this is the same command. Right now I'm not piping it into select and expand properties. But this command does the select string twice, so I thought, well, maybe we could be a little more clever on this. And we'll take the URL and we'll pipe that into my select string, and we'll do an out variable into the search result. And then as we go piping down the rest of the way, when we get to the substring, I'm using the search result to figure out the length. This way, it only does the select string once. The reason you do this, you're trying to get the most amount of speed out of your command as possible. Or if you're a single-line command cheater, and yes, I'm using cheater, you would do it like this. You would put your search scope into the URL2, and then you would pass it along like this. Notice the semicolon in the middle. Yes, it's still a single line, but technically this is 2 commands. Okay. That is the end. All right, so let's take a look at that code right quick to show you all the stuff I did. Now this console command, I actually have the explanations in here, and I thought it was kind of fun. I'll show you this as well. The run console command takes the content from console command, clears the screen, and then for each line, if the line starts with the pound, it writes the line out and then sleeps and then skips the rest. If it doesn't start with the pound, then it runs invoke expression and gives you an extra line, and then does this wait debugger. That's how I was able to pause and hit C and enter to keep running. And so that is the console. Okay, this would be a good place for me to pause and see if there were any questions about anything I've done so far.
There's nothing in the chat. Does anybody have any questions they want to interject at the moment?
Feel free to jump in. Nope.
I heard some crickets. I think we're good.
Okay. Well, the crickets know PowerShell, so we don't have to explain this to them. All right. So I just explained the method that I used to play it. Returned all the objects into the same scope. That's why the get member looked kind of funny. I explained it in there, but I went ahead and put it into the presentation in case I forgot to mention it. So doubled up on that one. All right. So level 2, the PowerShell script. So let's convert that command to a script instead of having to remember the proper syntax every time we want to enter the URL. And back to the code. I forgot that the sound was there, but I'm going to skip it this time. Just every time you see to the code, think Batcave. To the code. Now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to switch my branch. Oops, before I switch the branch, let me close this window. I've had some weird things when I have files open and I switch branches, so I got to make sure I do that. And we'll go to the script branch. And now we have, close the Explorer, make sure we can see everything here. We have the return URL from urldefense.ps1 file. The script is intended to be run after copying the URL to the clipboard from a defended email. I'm going to go ahead and get this command here. I'm going to go to the end, press F8, get that in there. So now that I've got, oops, lost my scroll here. Here we go. So now if I do paste, there's my URL. Excellent. Okay, so it's in my clipboard, and my script will say, get the clipboard, put it in the URL. If there is no URL, there's nothing in the clipboard, please copy this thing. I probably should have done this before I set the clipboard so you could see the error, but I just put a little error checking in here to say, hey, you should have put something in the clipboard. And then it does URL, select string, out variable, search result. I guess I like that one better. Matches, value, substring. All right, let's run it. Okay, so it ran the command and returned back the inside URL. Perfect. I guess that's really it. Any questions about that? I mean, if I did a good job explaining the console commands, then this is pretty straightforward. Okay. Back to the presentation. Note, this may be as far as you want to go because it solves the problem. You don't have to remember the command. You now have a script. You copy your URL, you run your command, you're done. Working code is working code. So do keep that in mind. However, there are some drawbacks to leaving it right here, and this is why I say this is an evolution, why it should keep moving, is that you need to know where the script is to call it. There's no help text to explain what this script is going to do. So if you share the script with someone else, they're going to have to read the code, and obviously there's an assumption there is that they're going to know how to read the code in order to know how to use it. And I said, okay, I cheated a bit, but you know what I mean. And the reason I say I cheated a bit is because this line right here says this script is intended to run after copying the URL, and then I gave an example. Normally, this line 6 through 11 here would be all I would put in this kind of script. Just be like, all right, here it is. Run it. Okay. So yes, I did cheat a little bit. Oh, I'll ask for forgiveness later. You must have the URL in the clipboard for the script to work properly. So that might be a drawback. What if you had something else in there and you ran the script and it gave you a weird thing? Now, I was kind and I put an actual error message in there if your clipboard is empty. But how many have empty clipboards? I mean, there's almost always something in my clipboard because I'm Control-C'ing all day long. So I'm going to get some weird results. Before I go into level 3, let me go back one and say, I'm just going to check in again. Are there any questions or any questions about the drawbacks? Okay, moving on. So now we're going to talk about leveling this thing up. And this is what I call the fancification of the script. So now we have the PowerShell script with parameters. So parameterizing your script will make it more flexible for you and for everyone else who comes along and is using your script. So let's go look at what that looks like. Close that. And so now I'm going to say script with parameters. Just scroll, yep. So let me close this window so we can see it all. Don't worry about the stuff that's scrolling off to the right. It's just that really long URL. There's nothing else out there. Okay. So now I have a parameter block. At the beginning, I have a URL parameter, and I want to validate that this is not null or empty. So it'll actually have something in there. And then I have an if the URL, so it checks to see if it's null or empty. And then I take my value and I put it in URL with delimiter. And then I remove the delimiters at the beginning by having a substring, and then I remove the delimiters at the end. Notice how I'm not doing this all in one command this time. I've broken it out. And the reason I broke it out is just to make it easier to read. So if someone comes along my script and they find it after I've left it somewhere that they found it, they can make sense out of this thing by just looking at it. It's doing this. It's doing that. Okay. So let's run this and see what it does. It does nothing because I didn't pass it a URL. All right, so let me get this URL here so that I have something to pass. And we're going to run this again, except this time I'm going to run it from down here. And I get my URL. Perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. Now at the bottom of the script, I did something interesting, is that I said, well, if I'm going to run this script, I need to check and make sure it's working. So I effectively just ran this line. So let's see what happens if I run this one. I'm just going to highlight it and press F8. And it says, I cannot validate the argument. Because, why? Validate not null or empty. Cool. Let's try this one. If we just run the script by itself. That's why I have what here. What just happened? So with this one, when the URL was null, it did what I wanted to do. But this one, it ran just fine. But it didn't give me any output. Well, let's run the last one, and then I'm going to go back and explain what happened on 21. All right, so this time, I gave it blah, and it says, hey, you can't do that. And the reason it failed is in here in line 13, the length is too short. And the reason the length is too short is because it already whacked 2 characters off of this one. So now I just have AH, and when it tries to eliminate those last 2 characters and the length is wrong, it failed. So that's what happened in this. Now notice, there's no explanations to this. You have to be able to read the code to figure that out. And this 21 is interesting in that validate not null or empty on a parameter only validates if you pass it the parameter. That's why 20 said, I'm sorry, it's null, you can't do that. And why 21 just said, yeah, sure, fine. Even though it still passed null in here. Now my if URL caught that, but had I not put this in there, it would have rolled right into this and tried to do some other things and would have gotten different error messages. All right. So any questions about that?
Nope, nothing so far. I think we're good.
All right. Everybody knows everything I'm talking about. Okay. Now note, on this, I put tests at the end of the script. Now, of course, they were examples, but tests nonetheless. That way, if I'm up there fooling around with the code, I know each one of those needs to pass because they're all different ways that this script could be used. And I want to be able to handle the errors. And so that's how, like the one where it had nothing in there and it just returned nothing, well, that's not necessarily bad behavior on PowerShell's part. You didn't pass me anything, and so I gave you nothing. Okay, but then on the other one where I did blah, you might want some error handling or some data checking or something in there. So you can make your script a little fancier. Note the different method of finding and removing the underscores. Now, I did point that out. So instead of the big long string and using the substrings, I broke them out into take them off the front, take them off the back. I did mention it's easier to read, so I'm jumping ahead of my own PowerShell or my own PowerPoint presentation here. Question. I actually am going to ask someone to say something. Is this actually better than level 2? I wish I had someone to call on, like a class. Like, you there, trying to avoid your eye contact with me. Is it better than level 2?
Maybe.
Maybe. That's a good answer, because it sure could use some error handling. Level 2 worked. Level 3 sort of works. All right. Let's move to level 4. And this is where when I teach PowerShell classes, I tell my students, this is where I want you to be. I want you to be moving in functions. Scripts are great, commands are great, but I want you to be thinking about functions, because functions rule. However, there are rules for functions. A function does one thing, and it does one thing only. It's a very focused solution. It takes input. That's very helpful to a function. And it returns an object. So it brings something in, does the one thing you want it to do, and then it sends an object back out to the user. All right, so let's look at what this looks like as an object. Excuse me, as a function. Close that. We'll switch from script parameter to function. Now note, before I point anything else out, the name of my function has now changed. Before it was return URL from URL defense.ps1. Well, now I'm doing verb noun format for my name. And my function also has that. Verb noun. Get original URL from URL defense. Same parameter block. Same code. End. So, besides renaming the file and putting function at the beginning and an extra curly brace at the bottom, this is exactly the same as my script. But the cool part about the function is now that we have these examples, if I just run this, I've got some extra F5s in there. If I just run this, you don't see anything, but it is now loaded. So now I can do get. Oops, only works if you spell it right. O-R-I. First is the file name. Then you hit tab again and you see, here's my command. And I can do control space and it'll show me the parameters that are available for my command. All right, well, I'm going to cancel out of this because this is even better. And this is something that I do with my functions is, notice I have examples at the bottom. And so now I can uncomment out an example and press F5 again. It'll load the function. So if I'm editing it, I'm making changes to the function, it will load it new, and then it will run my example. And I can have multiple examples. When I step through all my examples, I know that my function is it's covering my use cases. All right, so let's F5 that. And like magic, I got my URL right out of the URL defense URL. All right, so let me take that one and run the next one. What does it do when it's blank? Hey, you can't do that, just like the other one. Okay, what about this one? This one is asking me for the URL. Why is that? Well, it's because I made the parameter mandatory. So if you pass it null, not only does it have to validate not null or empty, but if you leave it off, because it's mandatory, it has to be there. Okay, I'm just going to cancel out because I don't need to show you that it works. We know that it works. Okay, What happens if we do this one? Because it blew up on the other one. What does it do here? Yep. It blows up. Now, slightly different message. Let's look at the code. Right here on line 9, I'm looking for the matches value. And I say, if URL with delimiter equals this, then run this code. If you don't get a result proper back from select string on the double underscores around text, then it just rolls down here and does a write error. So now we've got a little bit of error handling in our code. Okay? Let's see, was there something else? Nope, that was it. And then this one is just showing again that you can do a set clipboard. And then in order for this to work, you have to do both of these at the same time. So I'm going to pass this URL into the clipboard, and then I'm going to do the command get URL defense, and then I'm going to do a sub command passing that into the URL for get clipboard. And we run that. And I forgot to scroll down, and it works just fine. Okay. Notice the function returns. Oh, I guess I should have done that. I could do. Let's do this one again. Except instead of running it, I'm going to copy, because I want to show you that there is an object coming out. So I'm going to pipe that to get member. I'm going to spell it out. Why not? And you can see that it is returned. No, scroll one. Oh, goodness, my scroll. I want it to scroll just one. There it is. Type name system string. So that's the results. Okay. Any questions or anything you saw in the code? I know I went through it a little quick because I'm building on top of each other here each time. Any questions or anything you want any more information on this? Nope. Okay. This must be going really well, or nobody's listening. We'll figure it out which. Note how the function code is almost identical. I did point that out. So why would you want to create a function if your code is virtually identical? And did I follow the rules? Oops, didn't want to get off that. So the reason you would create a function, and I didn't put this into the slide, is that once that function is written and you load it into your profile, or load it into your console, then you can execute that command at any point that you're at. So if you're at the root of C, if you're in temp, you're in your home drive, you're on a remote system, and you come back to your local file system, it doesn't matter because that command is available to you at any time. So you get an email, you go to it, and you're like, oh, but you were busy PowerShelling just a minute ago or just a second ago, and you say, I got to go check this URL. Oh, it's one of those rewritten ones. Let me go get that one, and so I can run this command. That's what makes it so great. And did I follow the rules? It does one thing and one thing only. It gets the URL. It is a very focused solution. It does take input. So you pass it the URL, and you can have it, work just great like that. And it does return an object. So yes, for these rules, I did follow them. Now there's level 5. And this is an advanced PowerShell function. Well, what's the difference between a standard function and an advanced function? I hope you're ready, because I'm hoping that I'll blow your mind. But I probably won't, because you've seen advanced functions before. So let's go look at the code. No, I don't want to save any of that foolishness I just did. Let's go look at advanced function. Uh-oh. I don't want to check anything out. I gotta back this thing back out. Sorry, give me a second. Okay. Hopefully that will... No, I don't want to save it. Oh, for crying out loud. Okay, I had this weird thing happen in VS Code before, so give me 1 second while I do a what is it called? It's I want to pull back from the origin. There it is, get reset hard. See, I already had this problem before, so I have to do it again. Give me 1 second. Okay. This talk is not supposed to be about how Visual Studio can get you and how Git can get you in trouble as well. All right. Hopefully that got us back on track here, and I can switch to advanced function. Okay, on advanced function. Ta-da! Work like a champ. All right. Let's take a look at our advanced function. Same file name, same function name. But now up at the top, I have help text. So if I start sharing this function with people, you can see that it's going to explain quickly what it is. It's also going to have a better description. I have examples. Note how my examples look a lot like my tests that were in the other function that we had. So I've got the standard one that I expect to work, and then I've got how to pass it through the pipeline, and I've got what happens if you send it null, and then I've got what happens if you send it bad data, and then I have what happens if you do it with the clipboard version. And then I have defined inputs, it wants a string, and I have defined the output, that it also is a string. I've also put a link to this particular code, so you can get to it through the GitHub. So if someone runs git help, they can go right to the code. And then I have what I like to do, which is a notes section. And notes only shows up if you do the full help, but I keep a running tab of what I've done different to the previous version and when I did it, so that I kind of know what's happening. Now there's other ways to capture this, and if you're working on code that has a lot of changes, it might not make sense to have a 4-page notes section. So if you're using a tool like Git and you're keeping all your comments in there, this may be overkill. But I find this to be really useful, especially when I'm working with functions or code that my coworkers are dealing with. And so I can go in here and say, hey, I made this change, and just read the notes. It's just right there in the function itself. Now, if you look at the parameter block, instead of the mandatory and pipeline being on one line, I moved them to multiple lines. I find this to be easy to read. And the reason that I can now pass data in here is because I've added value from pipeline. I've also made the string an array so that I can send it either one URL or I can send it a batch of URLs. Well, if you're going to do that and you're going to allow for data to come in from the pipeline, you now need a begin and a process block. So the process handles the stuff that's coming through the pipeline, but because string can also be an array and not be single, you need a for each block or a for each command right after the process block, so it handles each one as they come through. And then the code is pretty much the same, except I modified this a little bit. I tweaked it because it's faster than going through the pipeline. So I'm just calling the matches and the groups. Oh, and I also added urldefense.com into my regex. And what this does is the named searches. They're not named, they're just search groups. I could have done names, chose not to. And now it's looking for urldefense.com somewhere in the string, and then after that, it's looking for the double underscores. Okay, then the substrings are the same, and I've got a write error, and the error is now if this doesn't work, the URL is not from urldefense.com and does not contain the proper double underscore delimiters. So I have a nice, easy to understand error message given back to the user, whoever is using this advanced function. And then down at the bottom, I've got my test cases again. So let's see this thing mess up, because that's always more fun than watching it work. So I'm going to change that one line and run it. And it failed because why? Invalid. It has butchered my code. Look at that. So for some unknown reason, it has put one script into the other one. Oh, I don't know why Git and VS Code is doing this to me. It is causing me heartburn in my presentation. Let me reset the head again on this. Oh, this time I want advanced. Before I do that, let me make sure I'm in the right one. Just ls will work. Okay, so I'm in advanced function. Git reset margin. Advanced function. Check my code. Make sure it didn't merge those two files for some unknown reason. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that. I'm very strange. All right. We'll do that one. Run it. It's when I'm running it, it's adding this to the top. Wow. Okay. Let me close and reopen Visual Studio Code while I reset this one more time, just to make sure I'm getting this back. Let's see, Git batch. This is not part of the presentation. I guess it is now, actually. Okay. I don't know what's happening in my Visual Studio Code. Okay. All right, everything looks good. Console's done. Do I dare try this one more time? Maybe it's F5, and if I click run, it won't do that. Okay, that time it worked. Didn't do anything weird, didn't mess up my code. I got my nice, helpful URLs not from URL defense and does not contain the proper double underscores. Okay, let me get that back. Having fun like that will really throw you off of your presentation game. All right, so we looked at the code. I kind of walked you through the changes that were made to make it the advanced function versus just the standard function that I had. And so now I told you that functions rule, because now I've got nice error messages. I've got it where it'll help the user if they pass it back data. It'll also be able to take number of URLs, and it can take the data through the pipeline. So if you have a command that will go get your email and pull out all the URLs, then you can pipe it through like this. Now, of course, that's for this function. Maybe you have a different function where you want to check all the URLs on a website. And so you run invoke web request first, and then you pipe it into your advanced function. And so you'll want it to be able to take all of the links that invoke web request can find and pass them one at a time through the pipeline or into the parameter directly into your advanced function and have it work exactly how you wanted it to. Now, your function will only rule if you design it to rule. So you do have to have some standards. And this is Stephen's standard. I'm very specific about this. This may be best practice, but there are going to be some people who don't agree with how I do it, and they may want to argue about it. Okay? But Stephen's standard is, for my advanced functions, it has help text with examples and parameter explanation. So every parameter has an explanation. The input type is defined, the output type is defined. There's a link, if there is one appropriate, and it has notes. And then, of course, it accepts pipeline input. It accepts array input to a parameter where it's possible. There are certain parameters that it does not make sense to send it an array of data, but wherever it's possible, I like to add arrays. I do parameter validation. I want to check and make sure the data that's coming into the parameter is valid before I enter all my code and have to do all the checking in the code. I like parameter validation. I also like basic content checking. So then once you are into the body of your advanced function and you're looking at your code, you're checking to make sure that the content that you're dealing with is appropriately formatted or is in the right syntax or has the right parameters or properties or whatever you need. I also put test cases in mine. Now, it's better and more advanced if you're using Pester, but for my use cases for the functions that I'm doing, I just put basic test cases at the bottom so that I can easily uncomment them, run the code, check to make sure everything works the way I thought it should. The various ways of running the code, like using a single item, an array, passing through the pipeline, using named parameters, all that fanciness. And then I also have error handling in my advanced functions. Interesting question. Notice how I chose get. Would you choose a different verb? Because you are supposed to use the approved verbs in PowerShell when you're doing your function, but there's an argument that could be made that mine actually should have set, because I'm taking the URL and I'm setting what it should be. That one's not very strong because it should be kept. But what about reset? Well, I'm resetting a modified URL to the original URL, the one that you can see in there, not the rewritten one. So maybe reset would make sense, or maybe convert or convert from. Now, is there a hard, fast rule here? No. I went with get because get is kind of ubiquitous and everything winds up being get, as long as it's not making changes to some data or deleting things or adding items. Since this is just string to string, well, get seemed like a good place to start. Okay. Any questions about my standard or the verbs or this advanced function?
Nope, seems like we're all good.
Okay. This is the final. This is the finish, level 6. So this is where I would publish the function and start sharing it with people and put it out into the main default branch or however you guys describe that for your organization is how I do mine. So there are some refinements to the final version that I've done. I changed the function name to something shorter. I'm going to jump back over here and just have you look at this function name, original URL from URL Defense. It's very descriptive, and if you've worked with Azure function names, there's been some potential grumbling and complaining online about the ridiculously long and explanatory nouns that they use for theirs. So I shortened it up a little bit. I added more content to the last help example. So let's take a look at what my final one looks like. Hope this won't give me trouble like the last one did. Yes, I know. Are you going to do this to me again? Don't save. I got to figure out what's happening here. Discard changes. Maybe that. Ah, that did work. Learned something tonight. If nobody else learned anything, I sure did. Sweet. Okay, notice. Get URL defense URL. I made it shorter. No one wants to type out everything. Yes, tab will work for you. But I did tighten it up a little bit. I mentioned that I added more text to the last example. So I did put some more information in here. I even showed how you could write a very short function to get the URL defense URL from the clipboard, pass that into a variable, and then take that variable, output it, and also put it onto the clipboard. Why would that be interesting to you? Well, you may right-click, copy URL, go to your console, just type FURL, hit enter, and it will show you what the URL is, and it will also put that URL on the clipboard so that you can go back to your browser or back to your document or back to wherever and just paste it immediately. You want to talk about speed? That is some speed. And I like to make things fast because the faster I am, the more stuff I can get done. The more stuff I can get done, the more valuable I am, and I certainly let my bosses know that I am valuable. And you should too. Okay, the rest of that's pretty much the same. Yep, I don't see any other things that I changed. Okay. So that was the code. This is my pro tip. Put the most likely to be used example last. So when you run get help examples or get help full, the last help example is the one that's at the bottom of the screen. Now, why is that important? Well, it's because it's easy to get to. So if you're writing your help text, put the one, not the most complicated or the most esoteric one last, because I've seen people do that. And in fact, Microsoft even does that. They put the most complicated one last and the most likely one first. And then you have to scroll up to go find the first example and then scroll back down to where you were to figure the rest out. No, inverse that. Put the most used example at the bottom so that your users can get to it the quickest. Okay. So that has taken us all through the life cycle of my command and my script and my featureized script where I added some features to it, and then we had a function and an advanced function. I think I just said everything that's on this slide. Command line. Sometimes you just need a command, and that command is only used one time. So don't start writing an advanced function for something you just need to bang out right quick because you needed to get information. But maybe you want to see whether something would work before you invest time coding. So when I started this, where I got all of those commands in the very first command history was me doing get history after I figured out how to parse the URL. Okay, I was trying to figure out how would I do this? How would I do this? What would I do to make this work? Then when you get to the script, I use scripts to call functions. And stealing from Don Jones, this is what he calls a controller script. And so my controller script does the actions in order and is very repeatable. And the actions that are in my controller script are all functions for the most part. I use those scripts to carry out very specific, very repeatable tasks. And then the function where I want you to focus on and where all the ruling occurs is that this is very focused code that I can call from a script or pass objects in to do its intended purpose, and then return an object that can be passed to other functions as desired. It could be the ending point. You could chain them all together. I've chained multiple functions together to get the results I'm looking for. Help text is required. No, technically it's not. Yes, you can write a function without it, But if you're going to share it or you're going to give it to anyone other than yourself, please, please, please be kind and take the time to write the help text. It may be that you come back to your function after a year or so and you don't remember how to use it because you didn't write help text for future you. So please. And put examples for the different permutations of how to use the function. How many times have we done get help on a commandlet or a function that we got, and it shows one help example and it has 10 to 20 parameters in there, and you have no idea how to use this raft of parameters that someone bothered to take the time to code but didn't bother to take the time to explain. Don't frustrate people. Take the time to get your help text built out right. Let me give you some closing thoughts and then we're going to wrap this up and I'll take any questions that you have. Be sure you understand the problem so your solution actually resolves the problem. Do think about the end goal. For me, again, the end goal, I'm thinking about how can I make this a parameterized, flexible function. That's what I almost always go to, but there are definitely times where I don't. So be thinking about how you want to get to the end. Don't forget to continue to add to your skills. Okay, you do have skills today, but you become more valuable not by staying where you're at, but adding to those skills. So if that's why you're watching this presentation or you came to go learn some tips and tricks, that's what you're doing here. Take what you got from this presentation or any of the presentations that you go to in the future and look for ways to add to your skills. And in closing, I truly hope that I brought you some valuable knowledge that will help you with your solutions in the future. Please do stay in touch with me. You can get to me through Twitter or Discord. Those are my contact information there. I don't understand the numbers, but hey, I've got 7741. The PowerShell Bridge channel, I'm hanging out there fairly often. The easiest way to get there is to go to the URL provided here, the poshcode.org URL. There's the link to Discord. I recommend Discord, but if you're a Slack user, do use Slack. The only reason I recommend Discord is because it has infinite history. So if you want to go learn some stuff that people were talking about, you can scroll way back. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I do keep that to business and business only, so that's what my LinkedIn is. I'm not actually on ICQ. I just threw that in there to try to be funny for anyone who remembers what ICQ was, and to kind of humble brag about how low my number was, because I did get in pretty early. There's my blog. It does need CSS help. I agree that it is ugly. Please do not comment, but yeah. Everyone has their limitations. And then finally, the github.com link, and that's my main site, and I have all of the code for this presentation there for SJ URL defense. Thank you for spending some of your either morning, afternoon, evening, depending upon what time zone you're in, with me, and thank you very much.
Steve, do you get try and catch any in your advanced functions?
Oh, for sure. Okay. Yeah, when I'm doing error handling, I will use try and catch, and I also kind of have a rule about the try and catch is I don't put try at the beginning right after the process statement, and then write the entire thing out, and then at the bottom say catch, something went wrong, right? You don't want to do that. You want to be very specific about that. So let's just jump in and make some changes. Why not? So like here on this select string, I would probably do, if I wanted to capture the output, I would say error action stop so that it forces it into the catch block. And then before that, we would do try. And then I can't type and talk at the same time. My fingers are attached to my vocal cords or something. Or may be a better error message, but this just passes whatever error you picked up from the command that failed. That's kind of what I would do. Now, of course, it doesn't make sense in this code because if it doesn't give the select string, it's going to pass null in here, and I've got to catch using if here, but I could have done it differently in order to use a try catch. But try catches are spectacular. I use them all the time. I'll go back to my info on me slide. Any other questions or comments?
It's kind of the method I'm using. I'll start out at that console and work my way into a script and then into a function. Built several like that. It's a good method.
Yep. Any more? I left the script in here to demonstrate the evolution because when I was learning, that's how I went through it. Now I skip the scripts almost entirely. Unless what I'm trying to do with PowerShell is enter at a point of time or point of, I don't even know how to describe it, a very specific point, and I want it to enter and then exit and do nothing else. So, for example, if I was going to install software, I want it to start the software install, and I want to finish the software install. I don't necessarily care to then pipe that into something else. Now, I'm using this as a generic example, but that's kind of what I would do. But for the most part, I'm writing functions. So I'm now skipping because I want to get to that small atomic unit of code so that it takes input and returns output that I can then chain together, do some other methods. Are you finding the same thing?
Yes.
Cool. Any other comments or great tips that you want to share?
Well, thank you for a great presentation. When they get this out there, I'm probably going to send it to my coworkers for them to watch. Trying to get more of them to do similar stuff and improve their PowerShell skills.
Very good. Yeah, this is, I kind of titled this one for the 100 to 200. It's like you kind of need to know some things in order to stay with me. Like I didn't explain get, I didn't explain regex. So there's some in there that I didn't get into. So that's why I said it's kind of a 100 to 200 level talk. But then the very next thing after this, which we would definitely need a lot more time for, is to start rolling into, okay, well, I've written a bunch of functions, and now I want to tie those all together in a module. And there's some really good presentations on modules. I just saw one by Mike Kanakos to the SoCal user group, where he did a spectacular version of a spectacular presentation of explaining how you would use modules and how you would pull your functions together in order to do a custom module. So I strongly recommend that presentation.
And you're talking about regex. It was at one of their meetings that they had I just watched him at the Australia and New Zealand PowerShell meeting. They had Thomas on there, and he showed regex for rock stars. It's more advanced regex stuff, but he actually did a regex for noobs presentation at one of their meetings.
Yeah, I try to convince everyone that they need to learn enough regex to be able to ditch the like operator. If you're Like we'll go on the fly here. So if I'm doing this and I want to see what's inside there, so I do. Well, I don't know what's inside there, but I want to see if it has validate not null or something in there. So I'm going to do get content on my get URL defense, and I'm going to pipe that to. All right, fine. I'll do the full thing. Oops. SELE select string, right? And then I want validate. Select string by default uses regex. You can do simple match on it, and it will just do whatever's inside there, and it won't do the regex. But where I wind up using this, I'll say, let's see if I can. I'm trying to think of an example without showing like all of my code and all of my files. Let's see. Oh yeah. Let me go down one and over to my PowerShell repository. I've got more files in here. That this is all out on GitHub too, so you can go see any of this content. But if I was just doing the ls and I say where name like -sj, what is that going to do? Well, that's going to fail because I didn't do any of my parameters around, or my wildcards around it. Okay, so that gave me my files back. But what if I just wanted the gets and the update, but I wanted to, or excuse me, I just want the set and the update, and I want to skip all the gets. That's nearly impossible to do with like. But if you're using match, and match uses regex, then you can say, okay, I want, instead of star here, I'm going to do parentheses get pipe set close. What did I do wrong there? Oh, because I put get in there. I meant set and update. I didn't even follow my own example. What was I doing? I got the results I asked for. It did exactly what I said. So now I'm saying do set or update -sj and then the rest. And those are the kinds of things you can do with regex that wildcards just can't do. And that's why I try to encourage everyone to learn it. And I am not good at regex. I mean, Thomas is good at regex. He knows what he's doing. Whenever I get past this relatively basic matching stuff, I wind up on regex101.com, or I start going to Stack Overflow and looking around in there trying to figure out how to do the regex expressions. I mean, I'm better than a beginner, but I'm definitely not advanced.
All right. Well, thanks, Stephen. That was a good presentation tonight.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
I'm glad to have you back anytime.
Excellent.